have also each been charged with possessing a knife in a public place, currently remain in police custody and will appear at Bristol Youth Court tomorrow. And bring you more on this developing story as we get it. Well, staying with Avon and Somerset Police, and the force has referred itself to the independent police watchdog. That's after arresting a 42-year-old woman on suspicion of murder following the deaths of 3 children in Bristol. Officers attended a concern for welfare call in Blaze Walk in Sea Mills this afternoon. They say the suspect is currently in police custody at a hospital. One local woman says the family had 2 boys, aged around 8 and 6 months, and a girl aged around 4. The force said it was contacting the IOPC due to prior police contact. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has called for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza during a speech at the Scottish Labour conference. It's a change to his previous stance of a pause in fighting, saying instead the war must stop now. But he says the ceasefire can't be one-sided. He's calling on Hamas to release all of its remaining hostages. He also said a 2-state solution must be back on the table.
An end to the fighting, not just now, not just for a pause, but permanently. A ceasefire that lasts, conference, that is what must happen now. The fighting must stop now.
And finally, the Prince of Wales has been attending the BAFTA Film Awards tonight, his first high-profile royal engagement since his wife's operation. William, who is president of the arts charity, stopped to take selfies with members of the public as he made his way down the red carpet. Oppenheimer has won BAFTAs for Best Film, Best Director, Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor, whilst Emma Stone has won Best Actress for Poor Things. Meanwhile, The Zone of Interest has won Outstanding British Film. Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Mark.
My thanks to Ray Addison, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to a busy Mark Dolan tonight. In my big opinion, why are the Conservatives losing? Well, because they're not Conservative anymore. I'll be dealing with the Tories' identity crisis in just a moment, and we've got a special guest. In the big story, is immigration good for Britain? We'll be joined by a fearless academic who says no. Also, should William forgive Prince Harry and bring him back into the royal fold? I'll be asking legendary royal author Angela Levin. My Mark Meets guest is former Blairite MP and celebrated diarist Chris Mullin. Is Labour on the verge of another decade in power? In my Take at 10, John Lewis are in hot water for promoting a magazine which recommends breast binders for young girls. Has Britain's favourite department store finally lost the plot? I'll be dealing with this woke madness in no uncertain terms at 10 o'clock. Also tonight, with his call for a ceasefire in Gaza today, has Sir Keir Starmer caved in to pressure from the left of his party? Anne Widdecombe weighs in on another U-turn from our would-be Prime Minister. We've also got tomorrow's front pages at 10:30 sharp, with 3 top pundits who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script. Tonight, Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Neil Parish and Annie MacDonald. Plus, the most important part of the show, your emails. They come straight to my laptop, mark@gbnews.com. And this show has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. So, a big 2 hours to come, lots of very special guests, and we start with my big opinion. A new poll suggests the Tories would have a better chance of winning the next election if they embraced traditional Conservative values. This news is about as surprising as the Pope's Catholicism and the fact that bears relieve themselves in the woods. The poll, commissioned by long-standing Conservative Party supporter Lady McAlpine, found that 8 in 10 one-time Conservatives, those who have voted Tory in the past but are now planning to back another party, agreed with the statement that the party would have a better chance of winning the next election with someone who has more traditional Conservative values than it does with Rishi Sunak. Now, I don't doubt that this is true, but the problem predates Rishi Sunak. Boris Johnson's promised political revolution in 2019 failed to materialise, with Red Wall's seats levelled down rather than up, largely thanks to Bojo's 3 disastrous national lockdowns and the economic catastrophe that followed. Liz Truss's blink-and-you'll-miss-it stint as Prime Minister and her gamble on growth was snuffed out by the blob. And yes, the bookish and managerial Rishi Sunak, the 21st century's answer to John Major, has failed to get anyone's pulse racing, with the possible exception of Mrs. Sunak. And who could disagree with Britain's most fearless political academic, Professor Matthew Goodwin? Taking to Twitter on Friday, he said to his army of followers, the Tories said they would lower migration, then put it on steroids. The Tories said they'd control the borders, then lost control. The Tories said we're sovereign but won't leave the ECHR. The Tories blame Labour but won't change new Labour law. The Tories promise a new economy, then gave us more of the same. Matt Goodwin goes on, this isn't hard. People are leaving the Tories because they were promised one thing, only for the opposite to happen. Well, Professor Matthew Goodwin joins me on the show in 10 minutes' time. And whilst Goodwin is right and the findings of this poll are unarguable, the choice in May or November of this year remains a simple one: Conservative or Labour. Why is a country which this polling suggests wants more robustly Conservative policies about to deliver a Labour government? Well, I think it's far from certain that they will. In our increasingly presidential system, when faced with a choice of Starmer and his U-turns and woke politics versus sensible Sunak, the kind of boy you'd happily bring home to meet your parents, it's no contest. The Tories may be hated, and perhaps rightly so, but there's no great love for Labour either. And frankly, I'm not sure that Sunak has to shift to the right of Attila the Hun. All he's really got to do is deliver. And I'd argue, with the return of power sharing in Stormont, reduced inflation, fewer illegal crossings, and the avoidance of a deep economic downturn, Sunak has done just that. He's only been there, don't forget, for over a year. If Rishi Sunak can get growth up, stop the boats, tackle the debt and fix the NHS, and yes, remember why he became a Conservative in the first place, he may prove a lot of people and the polls wrong. Let's get reaction from my top panel in just a moment. But first, we're joined live for her first ever appearance on Mark Dolan tonight by the woman who commissioned that poll, Lady McAlpine, Conservative Party supporter and member of one of the country's foremost construction families, McAlpine. Lady McAlpine, welcome to the show. What is your key takeaway from the polling that you commissioned?
Golly. The fact that you sound as though you're totally wrong. I'm fascinated by everything you just said. But the thing that comes loud and clear is that people want to go back to what we call good old-fashioned Conservative values. They want lower taxes, obviously. They want to get rid of, they want to stop the votes. They want to sort out NHS. They want to get rid of some of the civil servants. They just want common sense, and we haven't got it. We haven't had it for a long time.
Well, indeed, Lady McAlpine, you've supported Boris Johnson in the past, but based upon his actions in high office, amazingly high levels of legal and illegal migration, eco-zealotry and 3 national lockdowns, was Boris Johnson really a proper Conservative?
Yeah, I think he was. And I think given if he was allowed to actually do what he wanted to do, we might get somewhere. I'm horrified by the negotiations that were going on behind the Cabinet Office. What was going on in Conservative head office, Conservative central office, was definitely making a hell of a difference to what was happening in the Cabinet Office. Can't be right. Like, we need a squeaky clean new Conservative Party.
Lady McAlpine, your polling suggests that those who had previously voted Conservative but are now disaffected would look warmly upon a replacement to Rishi Sunak, someone with more Conservative values. Would you like to see a change at the top?
Absolutely, yeah. Nobody voted for Rishi, and he might be a very nice man, but he's pretty useless as a Prime Minister. And I'm afraid what this poll shows, though that wasn't published today, I think it's going in tomorrow, is that about 90% of the people who voted were quite happy with Boris, because most people actually don't think he did that much wrong, and he didn't really have a chance. He got us out of Europe, and then we got COVID, and then they stabbed him in the back. And I'm not just a Boris apologizer or something, but I really think we all felt that with someone as dynamic and charismatic as he had been when he was Mayor of London, that he actually could make things work if he'd been able to put in place the people he needs to put in place to make it work.
Lady McAlpine, sorry to interrupt you, Lady McAlpine, is it conceivable that Boris Johnson could be placed in the House of Lords and return as leader of the Conservative Party prior to the next general election?
Well, I wasn't thinking that, but yeah, I don't see why not. There are certainly an awful lot of people who would like him, yeah.
In the absence of Boris Johnson, who might make an appropriate replacement for Rishi Sunak, given the logistics of bringing back Bojo?
Oh, dear. The only one I can think of is Rees-Mogg.
And why do you suggest Jacob Rees-Mogg?
Because he's got the brain, and Boris has got the brain, and quite frankly, their brains really are outstanding. And also, although an awful lot of people complain about the way Jacob speaks, but he's been speaking like that since he was 10 years old. That's really not a problem. What he says is good fun and good sense. And he has a way of, he aids his audience, but he's actually, he's intelligent. We need good all-round intelligence.
Lady McAlpine, he's been speaking like that since he was 10 years old. He's been dressing like that as well. Please stay with us, Lady McAlpine, because his sister is with us in the studio as one of my top pundits, former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, farmer and ex-Tory MP Neil Parish, and trade unionist and political commentator Andy MacDonald. Your reaction there, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, to the suggestion by Lady McAlpine that your brother, Jacob Rees-Mogg, should be the leader of the Conservative Party?
Well, I can confirm that he has been talking like that since he was 10 years old, but he's 10 years older than me, so I can't tell you before that. I would feel very, very sorry for his children. I think it is a miserable life growing up in Downing Street. I think it's a very hard life, and I think there is so much negativity for a Prime Minister at the moment that I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, and actually he's a very nice brother. However, I think Lady McAlpine has done really amazingly good work in getting this poll undertaken by Andrew Hawkins, who is one of the most respected pollsters in the country. It was a sample of over 13,000 people, which is far bigger than most of the polls we see in our newspapers. And it demonstrates something that I think an awful lot of Conservatives have been thinking and saying amongst themselves for a long, long time, that the Conservative Party needs to demonstrate, needs to express and needs to enact real Conservative common sense values in order to win.
Neil Parish, your reaction to this polling and the comments of Lady McAlpine, she'd like to see Rishi Sunak evicted from number 10.
Well, I think we are in the Conservative Party, we've become a bit trigger happy. And I think we're sort of very keen on finishing off one leader and bringing on another. And I don't think it would make very much difference now at all, because I think, if you're talking about bright people, I would suggest to you that Rishi Sunak is probably one of the brightest prime ministers we've ever had. So he's got the brains for the job. If we see the taxes come down and if we see interest rates come down and we actually get back, as the poll says, to Conservative values, I think a real fight will be on. But, of course, what you've got to be careful of is if you move too far to the right, is exactly what the Labour Party want, because then they and the Liberal Democrats move in and take the more moderate Tory votes. So, in the end, you land up, if you're not careful, trying to get more and more vote on the right and losing some in the centre ground. So leave it centre-right, and I think Richie will get it right, and I have every confidence in him, and I think at the end of the day, the Conservative Party is the one that's unpopular, and I think you'll find... I think we forget sometimes with Boris Johnson how unpopular he was when he came out of office. So, you know, when he's out of office, we suddenly have a great deal of more sympathy for him. So, you know, let's keep going, and I believe the election is still there to be held, you know, however difficult it might be.
Andy MacDonald, this psychodrama is great news for the left, great news for Labour.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If I was in Keir Starmer's office, I'd be, I'd be bringing out the bubbly. I'd be very happy. You know, this is just more division amongst the Conservative Party. You know, the fallout from these by-elections already caused enough issues. You know, a slight rise for Reform UK there, one of their better results in by-elections. So obviously that will be raring up the right of the Conservative Party. But it's not a personal issue. It's a brand issue. The Conservative Party have been in charge for 14 years and they've made a lot of mistakes. So it's not just wheeling through the leaders. You know, if you replace Rishi, you'll have had, you know, a fourth Prime Minister in a term of 5 years. It's the brand that's damaged. What they need to do is just work on, you know, trying to get the public services back to where they should be and just take the defeat, you know, like they should, and then do what they want to do in opposition. It's just ridiculous that, you know, Lady McAlpine wants to get a new leader. She thinks that Boris Johnson was stabbed in the back. What, by himself, you know, he lied and covered up the Chris Pincher scandal. I mean, he wasn't stabbed in the back.
Annunciata, briefly, if you can, and the last word to Lady McAlpine. Annunciata.
I think that both my fellow panellists are making a fundamental mistake. It is not about a brand, it's about principles. Yeah. And if the Conservative Party, whether under Rishi Sunak or anyone else, gets back to common-sense Conservative principles, they're in with a chance.
Lady McAlpine, we disagree over Rishi Sunak, but I'm so grateful that you've joined us on the show. I hope the first of many appearances. You get the last word, briefly, if you can.
Right. As far as I'm concerned, if all the people who claim to have Conservative values just joined up, and at the moment we've got far too many factions, if they all got together as new Conservatives and maybe help reform and reform help them, we could still beat Labour. That's all I'm going to say.
Brilliant stuff. My thanks to Lady McAlpine, who commissioned that explosive poll. Lots more to get through. Let me tell you, keep those emails coming. mark@gbnews.com. But next up in the big story, is immigration good for Britain? We'll be joined by a fearless academic who has his doubts. Plus, in an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's poll, we've been asking, would a change of leader save the Tories? Well, the results are in, and I shall reveal all next.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
comfortable ride, beautiful engines, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have two SUVs?
Well, one SUV. at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can run down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
The growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem. Maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks, or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. I'll get to your emails very shortly, but we've been conducting an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll. We've been asking, would a change of leader save the Tories? 35.9% say yes, but a damning 64.1% say no. It's time now for the big story, and it's been revealed that UK companies are now looking to foreign workers because managers have found it so difficult to attract British staff. The economist Max Mosley told the Telegraph newspaper that international workers are propping up the labour market. More than 9 million people of working age have quit the jobs market, and the number of companies registering to become sponsors to hire staff overseas, I should say, has doubled in the past 2 years. Meanwhile, the Times newspaper report that the Home Office is facing unprecedented demand for work visas before the rise in the minimum salary threshold in April. 169,000 work visas were offered last year. So, whilst the debate rages about current levels of legal net migration, last year almost 700,000 people, is immigration good or bad for Britain? Well, politics professor and best-selling author Matthew Goodwin, who is the author of one of the UK's biggest Substacks at matthewgoodwin.org, always a must-read. Well, as I said, delighted to say that Matthew Goodwin joins me now. Matthew, good to see you in the studio. You're going to be hosting a major live debate about this on the 18th of March. We'll get the details in a moment. But in short, what's your view? Is immigration good or bad for the country?
Well, the kind of immigration that we have now, mass immigration, low-skill immigration, low-wage migration, I think is bad for Britain. You remember the 2019 general election, Boris Johnson said we're going to get high-skill, high-wage, highly selective migration, which is going to drive productivity, drive innovation.
Australian points-based system?
The Australian-based points system. What we got actually was the opposite of that. The Conservatives, I would argue, really failed on migration. And what they've given us is an economy that is really based, Mark, on lots of low-skill, low-wage migration from outside of Europe. Now, if you look at the latest studies that have been done, the University of Amsterdam, in Denmark, Sweden, they all say the same thing. The kind of migration that we are now dependent upon takes more out of the economy than it puts into the economy. So that's why I'm arguing that this kind of mass migration is bad for Britain. And also, fundamentally, Mark, it's not just about what it adds or takes away from the economy. It's bad for the country in terms of pressure on public services. It's worsening the housing crisis. Almost all of the evidence recently shows that quite clearly. And culturally, I think it just makes people feel very anxious about the direction of society. How are we going to hold this country together when we're going through this scale of change at this speed? And I think that's why many people, I think, watching this show will be thinking, something's not right here.
What about that well-established correlation between a growing economy and a rising population?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We just had the latest economic data and, you know, the argument, you have more people, you have more GDP. I mean, that's basically how it works. But GDP per head, productivity per person is actually going down. Now, why is that happening? One reason, I would argue, is because we are basically now in an era where we've got mass immigration for the next 20, 30 years built into the forecasts. It's the wrong kind of migration. It's not productive migration. It's basically low-wage workers coming in to keep big business happy, to keep their profit margins high, to keep labour costs low, and to keep consumption high. But it's not actually generating good, robust, meaningful growth. So what I'm saying we need is a completely different kind of conversation about immigration in this country. Because, to be frank, most people out there in the country, not the people watching this show, they're clued into politics, they know what's going on. Most people out there haven't even figured out what's going on in the country at the moment, and that's why we're having this big debate.
Why have the Conservatives allowed this to happen? Because that was the promise of Brexit, wasn't it? Control of our borders, of sort of that, you know, ties in with stopping the boats and illegal immigration. But the implication of Brexit is that overall migration numbers would drop. Why have the Tories let this happen?
To be honest, Mark, it's because the Conservatives don't really understand who's voting for them today, and the Conservative Parliamentary Party leans much further to the cultural left than the average voter. So they're basically comfortable with legal migration. Look, I've been at
this level.
I've been at dinners with cabinet ministers, and what they'll say to you is the real issue is the boats, stopping the boats. Well, actually, we've had 112,000 people come into the country on the small boats since 2018, which is way too high. It's a joke. We should leave any international convention that stops us from controlling our own borders.
Including the ECHR?
I would argue that we should, but 112,000 is nothing compared to the 1.2 million people who came in via legal migration routes over the last 2 years. How many of those came to work? About 15%. The rest were students, relatives of students, the relatives of workers, or asylum seekers, migrants coming in on humanitarian routes. So, look, some immigration is good. High-skill immigration is good. Migration that genuinely benefits the NHS, fine. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is this model of mass migration based on low-skill, low-wage migration from outside of Europe, which is weakening, not strengthening British society.
Is there a case for a 5-year pause on all immigration in order for Britain's infrastructure, housing, transport, school places, NHS capacity to recover, to catch up?
Yeah, well, my argument would be that somehow we need to break this elite consensus. So we've got both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and I'd also add big business, committed to ongoing mass migration for the future. Just look at the forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility and others. They are now assuming we're going to have at least net migration of at least 300,000 each year going forward. So we need to break this. Maybe we should have a 3 to 5 year break on migration and say, let's just absorb the mass migration of the last 20 years, or maybe let's have a referendum. Let's see what the British people want in terms of net migration. And I would argue what they want is net migration maybe of between 50,000 and 100,000 a year, not 700,000 a year. I think the average British voter, Mark, is out there thinking, I accept we need some migration. We have an ageing population. We need to keep things like the NHS and so on ticking over. But I think people are looking at these numbers. Here's another number. Over the next 12 years, we're going to have 6.6 million people added to this country. 6.1 million of those will be because of migration. So what does that mean? We're going to have what is equivalent to 5 cities the size of Birmingham, or 70% of the way to another London, in 12 years, Mark. So that's currently what we're going to see based on official forecasts from the Office for National Statistics. Somebody in government needs to get their arms around this issue. And firstly, somebody needs to answer this question. If mass migration is so good for Britain, if it's so good for the economy, why is our growth so slow? And why is GDP per head, a key measure, why is it so weak? Because we've had mass migration for 20 years. Nobody in the Treasury or government seems to be able to answer my question. Why are we seeing this weak economy after 20 years of mass migration if it is a silver bullet that we're often told it is?
Why are the political left so pro-immigration, given that unsustainable levels often impact poorer communities the greatest?
I think it's a great question. I think the left views immigration as a luxury belief. It's an issue they use to project their sense of moral righteousness, their virtue. But you're absolutely right, Mark. I mean, Robert Putnam, one of the world's most esteemed professors, has shown this. In countries that experience large-scale migration, which are very diverse, levels of trust are lower, and you also get a big pressure on the welfare system because people become less willing to pay tax into the collective pot because they don't really know who they're supporting through the welfare system. You know, why is it, for example, that the British taxpayer should be happy to pay money into the collective pot while also seeing things like the protests after October 7th or, you know, criminal gangs in London or Abdul Azidi running around the country, pouring acid over a poor family, even though he was already a convicted sex offender? I think the British people have a very strong sense of fair play. And I think what they feel now is that principle of fair play is consistently being violated, not just by illegal migrants and so on, but actually by their leaders, by people who are supposed to put the British people before illegal migrants in a system that's clearly broken.
Well, Matthew, stay with us. Let me bring in my top pundits into this conversation. Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Andy MacDonald and Neil Parish. Andy, what do you think is a sensible number for legal net migration annually?
I think it'd fluctuate every year. You know, at the moment in construction, we are lacking 50,000 skilled workers. So, you know, if you look at construction, we need more migrants because realistically, the education system pushes people towards universities rather than learning a trade. So in construction, we need more migrants. But then if you look at hospitality, you'd need more migrants. But then if you look at the police service, you'd need less migrants. So, you know, there are challenges across different industries.
But Andy, why can't we get Brits to do these jobs?
Because we've got an education system that tries to over-intellectualise and push people into academia. That's why.
yeah, then they'll turn out like Matthew Goodwin. It could be worse. What do you think about this, Neil Parish? Your reaction to what Matthew Goodwin's had to say. Do you think immigration is good for Britain?
I mean, I think what Matthew says in principle is absolutely right. That the problem is in practice that since sort of COVID, we've had, millions of workers not come back into the workplace. And so, you know, I mean, the government get lambasted for too much migration, but they would also get lambasted if there was nobody to care for the NHS, nobody to work in the care homes. So we rely far too much on migrant labour. I get that entirely. But we do have to do something about our training systems and making sure that people can do those jobs. But, you know, you take having workers to pick vegetables and fruit. We do need, but albeit they come in on a temporary basis. Those are very much needed because when we try to get local workforce, almost impossible. So, I mean, it's a great principle, but if you talk to a lot of the employers and perhaps they bring in migration labour too easily, I accept that, but you'll find very difficult to employ sometimes our own workers. So it's not quite as simple as the principle of it.
Annunciata, I mean, many would argue we do have an ageing population. We need young blood. Plus, we are a country that's always welcomed people from overseas. You know, in the past few years, you've had Ukrainians, people from Hong Kong coming to this country, Syrians as well. And the point is that if immigration came down to zero, the NHS would probably collapse overnight.
We can't afford to keep running the NHS, the care system, our farming or anything else as a Ponzi scheme. And just constantly bringing in new workers to feed the top-end payouts is never going to be sustainable. We would have to keep growing this country ad infinitum. We'd have to be adding a Birmingham every few months. We cannot do it. We cannot justify doing it for the people who are already here, and we don't have the space or the wherewithal to be able to. It would also fundamentally be the wrong thing to do. But both of my fellow panellists are correct that we completely need to change our training system. We need to put money into training our own doctors so that we're not stealing the brightest and the best from other countries, but that we're bringing on our own. The other side of that is that this is having a massive effect on wages, that they are constantly under pressure from importing cheaper foreign labourers meaning that it's not even often worthwhile our own people doing the jobs because they can be undercut. We need to restructure the economy so that we actually train and rely on British workers for British jobs.
Well, we can agree on that. Brilliant stuff. Let me tell you that Matthew Goodwin's Substack is one of the most popular in the country. Regular articles about the state of our politics, and it's a Substack. You can be found at mattgoodwin.org. So head over there, mattgoodwin.org for the Substack. And the debate at hand is immigration good for Britain? Well, Matthew will be debating this alongside Constantine Kissin, Polly Toynbee and Aaron Bastani on the 18th of March at 7 p.m. at the Emmanuel Centre in London. Tickets available via Eventbrite. My thanks to Professor Matthew Goodwin. OK, coming up, should William forgive Prince Harry and bring him back into the royal fold? We'll put that to legendary royal author Angela Levin, who joins me live in the studio next.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Or they're trying to make it better, or they're trying to make it slower, a lot slower. Slower enough, in fact, for it to sufficiently allow the boats to start coming in to cause further political damage to Rishi Sunak.
Which it will do if it carries on.
Of course it will. And this is the Labour peers, the Lib Dem peers, and no doubt some of the Conservative wets, banding together, causing political damage to Rishi Sunak. And the longer it goes on, the worse it will be for the Conservative Party.
There's now a deadline on the Rwanda plan. It's got to start working this summer to have any electoral benefit for Rishi Sunak, because of course if the election is in November, by then the crossings will slow down. It's got to be up and running by about May or June, and then they'll take it from there.
Cool. And you have a crumb of comfort for us. Rishi Sunak met a Prime Minister.
Well, a crumb of comfort for those who want to stop the boat, certainly, or we'll get towards it. The PM today met Alexander De Croo, who's a Belgian Prime Minister. They've agreed a UK-Belgium law enforcement cooperation agreement. In short, that is a focus on surveillance and information, ultimately, which should help stop the boats. Not many boats make crossings from Belgium, but it's the kind of, they can hopefully use law enforcement. These are the kind of deals which Sir Keir Starmer's talking about. If he becomes Prime Minister, he'll do more of these deals with countries on the continent, and this shows that the PM, the Tory PM, can do them too.
And there may be intelligence sharing of crime gangs that operate within Belgium. As you say, it's a much, much further distance, much more perilous across the North Sea. Very unlikely that people will be leaving in any great numbers from Belgium. But nevertheless, is this of note, or is it a token victory against a backdrop of domestic
loss?
loss?
It's interesting they can do it with Belgium and not do it with the European Union, because so far we've been told the returns agreements can't be agreed with individual countries because they've got the European Union to talk to. Maybe this deal can be mirrored with France, and that might help with better cooperation, because basically after Brexit we're a sovereign country. We have to work on some areas more closely with our European neighbours.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free. Welcome back now. Buckingham Palace aides have reportedly told the Daily Telegraph newspaper that there is a 0% chance that Prince Harry could return to a temporary role working for the royal family during his father's illness. Clearly, Charles's judgment will influence Harry's fate. But what about his brother William? Should the Prince of Wales forgive Harry and bring him back into the royal fold? Is it time for the brothers to bury the hatchet? Let's get the views of renowned royal biographer Angela Levin. Angela, lovely to see you on a Sunday evening.
Thank you.
Welcome back from your holiday. I hope it was restful. King Charles seems to be a touch more sympathetic to Harry. It would appear that William is the tough nut to crack.
Well, fathers can love their sons, but not like what they're doing.
but I think brothers can really have a go at each other. And I think that William is much more furious with Harry because of the things that he said about his wife. I think, like a lot of couples, you can take something, but actually the person you love, Princess Catherine does nothing wrong. She tries very hard. She's a perfect example of a young royal. That it's very, very painful. And she's not used to that. She comes from a very stable, loving family. And to be called all sorts of things, very, very rude and unpleasant, and especially written down, I don't think he can possibly forgive that. And I think he also feels very strongly about the monarchy, and you can't call them racist. You know, these things that have been dropped, and one minute they say, no, they didn't call everybody racist, and the next minute they are, the next minute it's one person, then there's two people. It's very unstable, but it makes everyone feel very stressed about it. And I think that he's behaved so badly to the late Queen, his grandmother, and I think that's another reason why William adored his grandmother. Harry was supposed to, but Harry sort of made her life very difficult in the last months, demanding money when knowing that she was ill, and putting on the Oprah Winfrey show when the late Duke of Edinburgh was in hospital very ill again. It's sort of not actually thinking about anybody else. It's the me, me, me situation, and he's not going to have any of it.
Of course, the Sussexes would argue that they hold Princess Catherine in the highest regard. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, has appeared at the BAFTAs on the red carpet this evening, Angela. He really cuts a statesman-like figure, doesn't he? The contrast between him and his own brother couldn't be more stark.
Well, he's so dignified. When you looked, I watched a bit of it and I came here, but he was appearing as if nothing was wrong. He didn't want to spoil it for other people. He didn't want to look harassed or miserable or concerned. You know, he wanted to be in that job. He's been principal since 2010, and he wanted to do what is expected of him. His shoes shone brilliantly. He looked very smart. He was smiling, and he was very respectable. And you think if he's an heir to the throne, that's absolutely brilliant.
Particularly given the fact that his wife is still recuperating at home from a major operation, and that his father has been diagnosed with cancer.
Yes, but he obviously thought, that's not what I take to my work. I'm going to do it thoroughly and properly and make sure that the people who put all the effort into acting and filming actually come out of it feeling satisfied.
Palace insiders have told The Telegraph there is 0% chance that Harry could perform a temporary royal role. That's clearly a humiliating story, if true. Is there anything Harry can do to build bridges?
Well, actually, I'll be honest with this, and that is to ditch Meghan.
Really?
I think if he ditched Meghan and waited a bit, then that would be good. But I think he can't do that because, you know, you think your wife is more important than your family, really. And I think that that won't work. She doesn't want to be in the UK. She didn't like the British royal family. So it's going to be very difficult. And she has to be in control. You can see that, the way she holds his hand and doesn't let him move out of, you know, 1 foot from where she is. And she controls him. And he's OK with that, but she can't start controlling the monarchy if she came over, or if she just stayed there and just told him what he had to do. It would be the most terrible mess ever.
Of course, Meghan Markle would argue that Prince Harry is very much his own man, but you're entitled to your view, especially on this show, Angela. The clock's against us, but are you honestly saying that the only way back for Harry in relation to his family and perhaps the country is to divorce Meghan Markle?
Well, I don't think he will ever divorce her, but I think that that would be right. People really don't like Meghan. She's been very negative about the royal family. And she wanted to be next to the Queen and help her modernise it. Well, you can't come over and do that within 5 minutes, can you?
Angela Levin, what a treat to have you in on a Sunday night.
Thank you.
And welcome back for your holidays. Impressive tan. Playa de las Americas, Tenerife. It suits you well. Listen, lots more to get through. My Mark Meets guest is former Blairite MP and celebrated diarist Chris Mullin. Is Labour on the verge of another decade in power? We'll discuss that next.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a Conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, one year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to the show. I will get to your emails shortly, but coming up in my take at 10, John Lewis are in hot water for promoting a magazine which recommends breast binders for young girls. Has Britain's favourite department store finally lost the plot? But first, Mark Meets. And tonight, my Mark Meets guest is former Blairite MP and celebrated diarist Chris Mullin. Chris Mullin, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
A real treat to have you on the programme. So much to talk about. You've got 2 books out at the moment. You're more published than Stephen King. Your first book is the latest instalment in your diaries. I think it's 2010 to 2022. That's your time after having left Parliament. The new book is called Didn't You Used to Be Chris Mullin? You've had huge success with the first 3 volumes. What stands out from this latest volume, Chris?
Well, it's my take on the extraordinary politics of the last 12 years. Really, it starts with New Labour leaving government and ends with the death of the Queen. If you're wondering where the title came from, I was walking around the House of Commons about 2 years after I retired, and I ran into a former colleague who looked at me over the top of his glasses and said, "Didn't you used to be Chris Mullin?" And I said, "Thank you very much. That'll do for the title of Volume 4." So here we are.
Listen, keeping a diary involves enormous discipline. How did you keep it going for all those years, particularly, serving in a Labour government? You've been a very busy guy. Where did you find the time and energy?
Well, it's not very difficult, really, but you do have to be a bit disciplined about it. Whenever anything interesting happens, I make a note of it. I carried round for years a little red notebook in my inside breast pocket, and even sitting occasionally on the front bench in the House of Commons, I scribbled the occasional note. And then I stopped, really, in 2010 when I left Parliament, because I thought that life wouldn't be sufficiently interesting. But actually, the last 12 years it turned out to be very interesting. So I started again. And
well, your diaries, Chris, your diaries are renowned. They're so entertaining, but they are also an important historic document now, aren't they?
Well, that's very nice of you to say so, Mark. I do see them quoted from time to time, but quite whether they'll outlive me, I think the jury's still out on that.
Of course, in one of your volumes, you charted the rise of New Labour. You entered the House of Commons in 1987, so you were there for the modernisation of the party under Neil Kinnock, the late, great John Smith, and then Tony Blair. Do you think there's a similar sort of political revolution happening right now? Is there a kind of 1997 fever happening for Keir Starmer and the current crop?
I don't detect any fever. I do think, and I don't think that Starmer's going to be anything like as radical as Blair was. He has adopted some of the same strategy, which was to promise very little. In Blair's case, I remember what he said to me at the time, that Labour had a history of over-promising and under-delivering, and he was going to do it the other way around. And he kind of did that, certainly until the great shadow of Iraq fell over the New Labour project. It remains to be seen where Starmer's going.
Well, of course, you'll be hoping that he'll be in number 10 before the year is out. What about your other book, which is coming out, I think, at the end of February, and it's all about one of the great miscarriages of justice in relation to the Birmingham Six. I think, Alistair, you might have a still of the book. Yes, it's called Error of Judgment, the Birmingham Bombings and the Scandal That Shook Britain. Now, Chris, not only are you a former MP and government minister, but you were a journalist on ITV's World in Action when you exposed this story.
Yes. Actually, a friend of mine, Peter Chippendale, who was a Guardian journalist, had attended the trial in 1975, and he remarked to me at the time that he thought they got the wrong people. He also said that the answer lay in Ireland. You had to go and find the people who'd really done it if you were going to crack it. And it was years before. I was an impoverished freelance journalist in those days, and it was years before I had the resources to do anything about it, until I got a book was commissioned, that Error of Judgment, but even so I didn't have the resources. It wasn't until I persuaded Ray Fitzwalter, the editor of World in Action, to take me on to see if we could come up with anything new. We made 3 programmes. One destroyed the forensic evidence, one blew a hole in the police evidence, and the third one was an interview with one of the actual bombers. And so gradually bricks started to fall from the arch. I have to say, the legal establishment and the powers that be pulled every trick in the book not to have to own up. And even after the convictions were quashed in 1991, I lost count of the number of people who said to me, "Oh, I had dinner with Lord Justice so-and-so last night, and you should hear what he's saying about the Birmingham Six." They just carried on among themselves saying, "Oh, well, yes, maybe the police did soup up the evidence, maybe the forensic scientists got it wrong, but we know they did it."
OK, well, Chris Mullins, I wish we had longer. I do hope you'll return to the programme, but let me tell my viewers and listeners that Error of Judgment, an updated version about the Birmingham Six, is out now. And didn't you used to be Chris Mullins? Chapter 4, Episode 4 of his best-selling diaries. OK, lots more to get through. I'll be dealing with John Lewis next. Find out why shortly.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Marco Pitagna. Here's your latest weather update for the Met Office. We'll hold on to rather mixed conditions weather-wise across the UK during the week ahead, all of us seeing some rain at times and turning colder from the north later on. We've got a small ridge of high pressure moving in from the west tonight, quietening the weather down, but notice weather fronts gathering out towards the northwest, and they'll bring further unsettled weather during the next few days. So as we go into the evening and during the overnight period, much of the UK is set fine. We'll see some clear spells, allowing a few mist and fog patches to form, particularly across Wales and the south-west of England, but outbreaks of rain work their way in from the northwest across Scotland and Northern Ireland, reaching Wales, the north of England by the morning, with blustery showers towards the northwest later. A mild night, so no frost problems tonight. And as we go into Monday, that band of rain continues its journey southeastwards, becoming light and patchy as it reaches the southeast during the course of the morning, and then fizzling out to give much brighter weather across the UK heading into the afternoon. Some showers, though, towards the northwest, quite blustery here, with further rain moving in across the west of Scotland later in the day. It's a pretty mild day once again, temperatures generally in double figures, peaking at 10 in the north and near 13 or 14 degrees down towards the southeast. As for Tuesday, well, a band of wet and windy weather will move its way southeastwards across many northern parts of the UK. Towards the south and east, it stays mostly fine with a few bright spells at times, and staying quite mild once again for the time of year, with temperatures into the low teens Celsius in a few spots. But it stays pretty unsettled as we go into Wednesday and Thursday. Further wet weather around and turning colder from the north later on too.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, you know, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods
and
are
remember,
being
a lot of people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, you know, the profits... I think on Clarkins Farm I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something. Right. And you say, what? Yeah. And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that are being passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I am all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead. The Tartar Steel thing. Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting. You know, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you
it
say
can't
you
get any more
support
obvious.
some of these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message. But I do appreciate the message. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good evening. It's 10 o'clock on television, on radio and online. In the United Kingdom and across the world, this is Mark Dolan Tonight. In My Take at 10, John Lewis are in hot water for promoting a magazine which recommends breast binders for young girls. Has Britain's favourite department store finally lost the plot? I'll be dealing with this woke madness in just a moment. Meanwhile, Sir Flip-Flop strikes again.
A ceasefire that lasts, conference, that is what must happen now. The fighting must stop now.
We'll get reaction from Anne Widdecombe on what appears to be Sir Keir Starmer's Gaza U-turn. Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from tonight's top pundits. A packed show, lots to get through. I'll be dealing with John Lewis in no uncertain terms straight after the news headlines and Ray Addison.
Cheers, Mark. Our top stories tonight. 2 15-year-old boys have been charged with murder. That's after 16-year-old Darian Williams died after being stabbed in a park in Bristol on Wednesday. In a statement, Avon and Somerset police said Darian died after being attacked in Rawnsley Park in the eastern area of the city. The boys have also been charged with possessing a knife in a public place, and they currently remain in custody. They'll appear at Bristol Youth Court tomorrow. Well, Avon and Somerset Police has referred itself to the independent police watchdog. That's after arresting a 42-year-old woman on suspicion of murder following the deaths of 3 children in Bristol. Officers attended a concern for welfare call in Blaze Walk in Sea Mills this afternoon. They say the suspect is currently in police custody at a hospital. One local woman says the family had 2 boys, aged around 8 and 6 months, and a girl aged around 4. The force said it was contacting the IOPC due to prior police contact. Well, as we've been hearing, Sir Keir Starmer has called for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza during a speech at the Scottish Labour conference. It's a change to his previous stance of the pause in fighting, saying instead the war must stop now. But he says the ceasefire can't be one-sided. He's calling on Hamas to release all of its remaining hostages. He also said a 2-state solution must be back on the table.
An end to the fighting, not just now, not just for a pause, but permanently. A ceasefire that lasts, conference, that is what must happen now. The fighting must stop now.
And the Prince of Wales attended the BAFTA Film Awards tonight, his first high-profile royal engagement since his wife's operation. A warning for those of you watching on TV, the following footage contains flashing images. William, who is president of the arts charity, took selfies with members of the public as he made his way down the red carpet. Oppenheimer has won BAFTAs for Best Film, Best Director, Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor, whilst Emma Stone has won Best Actress for Poor Things. Meanwhile, The Zone of Interest, starring Sandra Hüller, has won Outstanding British Film. Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Mark.
Thanks, Ray. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. With his call for a ceasefire in Gaza today, has Sir Keir Starmer caved in to pressure from the left of his party? Anne Widdecombe weighs in on what looks like another U-turn from our would-be Prime Minister. Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from tonight's top pundits. This evening, former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, ex-Tory MP and farmer Neil Parish, and trade unionist and political commentator Andy MacDonald. Plus, they'll be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros. A packed hour, and those papers are coming, and Anne Widdecombe is waiting in the wings. But first, my take at 10. John Lewis has been quite the hot topic this week, and not because of a deal on flat-screen tellies or its women's springwear collection, even though I do love their fabrics. No, gone are the days when businesses like John Lewis made headlines for doing their actual job and selling you home furnishings, fashions or electronic goods. This is a company whose disastrous management under chairman Dame Sharon White appointed with a stellar CV but zero retail experience, has seen its profits collapse and widespread store closures, whilst seemingly more focused on box-ticking political correctness. We had to put up with the rainbow flags at branches of Waitrose, which some gay people consider homophobic and which some women consider misogynistic. We had that strange home insurance ad a couple of years ago in which a little boy dressed as a girl in a lovely bit of social engineering smashes up the family home whilst mother and daughter look on aghast. And now the Telegraph report that John Lewis has distributed a magazine for more than 70,000 staff that advises parents on how to find breast binders for transgender children. So, what is a breast binder? If you don't know, frankly, I envy you. Essentially, it's a medieval-style device which straps down a growing girl's breasts in order to restrict their growth and give these female teenagers a more masculine shape. They are designed to stop young girls' breasts from growing. What a time to be alive. The magazine recommends support for the charity Mermaids, which tells young people that they may have been born in the wrong body. Mermaids is currently under investigation by the Charity Commission over safeguarding concerns. There's a surprise. Mermaids also support so-called puberty blockers. What are puberty blockers? Well, if you don't know, once again, I envy you. This is a cocktail of chemicals given to teenagers to stop them going through puberty, which has huge potential implications for their long-term health, the development of their reproductive organs, and their ability to have children in the future. Now, furious GPs have branded the department store's in-house magazine irresponsible. And the Telegraph quote Dr. Louise Irvine, co-chair of the Clinical Advisory Network on Sex and Gender, who has said that these bizarre devices, the strange chest-flattening devices, which would surely double up as an instrument of torture in a different era, risk, and I quote, damage to the breasts, damage to the skin, chest wall muscles and ribs. They can cause pain, restriction in breathing, and make young girls less likely to participate in sports or exercise. Charming. The magazine is called Identity. It's been distributed by John Lewis to its staff and is produced by a group called the LGBTQIA+ Network. That's a lot of letters, isn't it? Well, I can think of a word comprised of just 4. The magazine features a piece on raising trans and non-binary children, whatever that means, and it focuses on a mother who we can call Jennifer, who says she was not surprised that her daughter wanted to transition to be a boy, as he hadn't worn anything girly since he was 8. Has this mother never heard of tomboys? I'd put that poor child into care. Trans ideology, which peddles the biologically impossible idea that you can change your sex, is so extreme and so bonkers that these breast binders are actually the least shocking intervention out there. That's just entry-level stuff. It's hormones, double mastectomies, and the removal of reproductive organs, which are the ultimate destination for many young people who may just have been confused, vulnerable, misguided, gay, or depressed. I'm honestly not clear how chopping up your body or stopping it from growing properly is going to boost your mood or enhance your life outcomes. Make it make sense. This whole story saddens me because I really love John Lewis, especially its brilliant staff. I want this fantastic business to prevail. But with an established and iconic brand like John Lewis now caught up in this madness and platforming what many argue is the mutilation of children and, at the very least, physical damage, it's just a matter of time before the wider public realise how in the grip of this crazy leftist ideology our private and public institutions have become. And with people being ordered to sign up to this nonsense by having to present their pronouns in emails and meetings, it is tyranny posing as empathy. Come back and see me in 10 years' time when those poor young people who have had their bodies butchered regret the decision and can't go back. With the likes of John Lewis participating in this, no wonder their profits are tumbling. This once great institution, like many, is in the grip of woke ideology and has forgotten that it's there to sell us fruit and veg, Samsung TVs and sensible shoes. John Lewis are famously never knowingly undersold. But for scores of their customers shocked by this woke madness, they will never knowingly go there again. Your reaction, mark at gbnews.com. Now, let me tell you that my team has been in touch with John Lewis all day. They've been very communicative, they've been very fair, and we've had an awful lot of feedback from them about this story. So let me provide you with the statement that they've given to Mark Dolan tonight. They've said the John Lewis partnership is a welcoming place for people to work or shop, irrespective of their background or beliefs. The Identity magazine was created by members of our LGBTQIA+ network, in which our partners, as we call our employees, share their experiences. The magazine was not edited or funded by the management of the John Lewis partnership. It's wrong to suggest the magazine provides advice from the partnership. There you go. Well, look, thanks to John Lewis for that reply. I don't want them to close down, but I want them to wise up. Let's get reaction from my top pundits, former Brexit Party MEP Annunciata Rees-Mogg, farmer and ex-Tory MP Neil Parish, and trade unionist and political commentator Andy MacDonald. I have to start with you, Annunciata, because we're talking about young girls here being encouraged to wear chest-flattening devices. Your reaction?
I think it's absolutely horrific. It's a practice that is known to have potentially lifelong consequences for girls who have not yet fully developed, let alone the more temporary back pain, skin rashes, breathing problems, even broken ribs that can be caused by binding girls' breasts. The idea that John Lewis, a bastion of this country, is allowing this to go out under its name, and whether funded by it or not, it is one of their in-house magazines. It has, therefore, a sort of authority from the John Lewis brand. And, of course, they're inclusive. We all want everyone to be treated equally, no matter what their preference is in any way. But to think it's OK to encourage children to take lifelong decisions can never be right. And I'm pretty sure that the 70,000 partners or staff at John Lewis would have rather had their bonus in 2023 than get a magazine telling them how their children can deform themselves.
Now, Andy MacDonald, this is a sort of magazine within a magazine distributed by John Lewis. They didn't sort of fund it or publish it themselves, but obviously they've platformed it. And this recommendation of certain types of chest-flattening devices came from one of the individual partners offering their experience, I think, of a trans child. So what's your reaction to this story? Are John Lewis guilty only of being inclusive?
I mean, you know, the statement from John Lewis made it quite clear. They didn't fund it. They didn't particularly support it. It was done by a network of staff members. You know, it's hard to put I doubt that the chief executive or any of the board know what goes on in these kind of member networks to such a great detail that they're reading every single article. I struggle to comment on it because it's a group of individuals who are writing about their personal experiences, whether they're gay or trans or they've had gay or trans children. You know, it's just someone's experience. I think some of the rhetoric that's come out about this has just been incredibly damaging, considering, you know, the tragic loss of Brianna J and the fallout of that over the last few weeks. I think we just need to roll it back on the anti-trans rhetoric and just let it sit for a while.
Well, you're absolutely right. First of all, I've got friends, Andy, who are trans, and they've been on that important journey. It's who they feel they are. But I've got to say, I draw the line at recommending medication to pubescent children to stop puberty happening, or young girls strapping their breasts down. For me, that's a red line. Would you tend to agree?
Sure, I guess, but, you know, they're acting as in an individual opinion. You know, they're not a medical doctor. They're a staff member at John Lewis. I think if you're taking serious medical advice from a staff member at John Lewis, then, you know, you've got bigger issues to worry about.
Yes, and Neil Parish, I'm not sure that this is necessarily an anti-trans story, and it's certainly not the sentiment of my take at 10, but it's certainly anti-children making decisions about their bodies which they could well come to regret.
Yeah, Mark, I think we're a very dangerous path with all of this, because once somebody is old enough to make up their own mind about what sexuality they are, then fine, let them do that. But I think there's far too much pressure on children and young people, and this sort of thing just does not help. I mean, I'm unashamedly conservative with a small c on this, because I think, you know, sexuality, let's be what we want to be, but let's be old enough, and let's not start taking drugs and strapping ourselves up and doing all sorts of things that will perhaps change our sexuality, and as the point that you made, is later on hugely regret it. So why are we, you know, we try to protect children in so many ways, quite rightly, and yet in a way with all of this we're going in the opposite direction that we would normally do to protect children. And I think, you know, let's sort of be realistic about this and let children grow up and be what they want to be, but not influence them too much in the meantime.
Of course, many would argue that trans people, particularly young trans people, suffer from terrible abuse in society, mental health issues, and therefore they need support, they need understanding, and they need to be included. Perhaps they even need to be treated. Let me know your thoughts, Mark, at gbnews.com. Mark Dolan tonight, the home of diverse opinion. Now, coming up with his call for a ceasefire in Gaza today, has Sir Keir Starmer caved into pressure from the left of his own party? And also, was the leader of the opposition right to have a bit of a go at Donald Trump? After all, he might be the next president. And Widdicombe reacts, plus those papers are on the way. See you in 2.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger. And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Listen, Greg's given me 10 seconds for emails on John Lewis. One of their publications has been talking about chest binders for children. This from Derek. Mark, go woke, go broke. It's well on the way for John Lewis. And Martin says, chest binders. Mark, can I get one for my man boobs? Martin, I'm sure you don't need it. I'm sure you've got a lovely figure. More of your emails at 10:30 with the papers. But speaking at the Scottish Labour Party conference in Glasgow today, the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, came closer than he ever has done to calling for an instant ceasefire in Gaza. Here's what he told conference.
An end to the fighting, not just now, not just for a pause, but permanently. A ceasefire that lasts, conference, that is what must happen now. The fighting must stop now.
Now, this former lawyer, as always, was very careful with his words and significantly is still not calling for an immediate ceasefire, which is what the SNP want to happen when they lead votes in this issue in the House of Commons on Wednesday. But this is the strongest language we've had from Starmer so far since the Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th. So is Sir Keir Starmer caving in to pressure from the left of his party? Let's get the views of tonight's newsmaker, former government minister and broadcaster Anne Widdecombe. Anne, what is your interpretation of what Sir Keir Starmer had to say today?
Well, he's trying very much to be all things to all men. He doesn't quite want to say, you know, the fighting must stop immediately. And then we'll work out all the rest later. He hedges around that by calling for a ceasefire which is permanent and sustainable. And I understand entirely how people feel when they see the awful pictures of what's happening in Gaza. But the fact is that Hamas began this, and until Israel has convinced itself that it has reduced Hamas to rubble, then it's not going to stop. And many of us would say, including me, nor should it stop. We need to put an end to this once and for all. And the way you do that is certainly not through a ceasefire, which allows Hamas to regroup, stock up the weapons again, get set, and then start the whole thing off again. You do have to finish it permanently. And that is what Keir Starmer said. But he also implied at the same time, in a weasel sort of words of a lawyer, he also implied at the same time that he wanted it, in inverted commas, now. Well, you can't have a permanent solution now. That is yet to come.
Of course, Keir Starmer would argue that he wants the carnage to end in Gaza, something we can all, of course, agree on, Anne. But how mindful is the leader of the opposition of the Muslim vote, which historically has gone to Labour?
Oh, I think he will be very mindful of that. And he'll also be very mindful of the enormous pressure coming from his own parliamentary party. You know, he's on a roll. Labour is generally expected to win the next election. He doesn't want a situation in which there's civil war within his party over this. So he's hedging his bets, basically. I mean, he's absolutely hedging his bets. He's talking about a permanent ceasefire. Yes, yeah, we'll all sign up to that. But that is very different from a ceasefire now with nothing solved.
Well, indeed. Of course, Lord Cameron, Foreign Secretary, was talking about a permanent ceasefire a couple of months ago, Anne. This is not new language. It sounds to me like a bit of a diplomatic fudge from Keir Starmer, perhaps not out of character. Do you think, however, it's possible that in the end Starmer will call for an immediate ceasefire? Do you think that's coming down the line?
Well, he has a history of changing his mind on everything. So it wouldn't be a tremendous surprise if he changed his mind on this as well. But I think if the pressure is sufficient from his own parliamentary party, he probably will move a bit closer towards it. Whether he will actually say now, regardless of the future, I don't know.
Briefly, Anne, how much of a problem is it if we have a Prime Minister in Keir Starmer who doesn't support Israel's right to self-defence and their military goal of eliminating Hamas?
It's seriously worrying, which is why he hasn't quite taken that position so far. He hasn't quite taken that position. He got as close as he's come to it today.
And let's stay on Keir Starmer because he will likely be our next Prime Minister, as you've said. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, He said he'd seek to rebuild, renew and resource the NATO alliance rather than divide and threaten, in what has been perceived as a thinly veiled reference to Donald Trump, who last week warned that he would not protect countries that failed to pay their bills. Is it right for the leader of the opposition to attack Trump in this way, someone that may well be the next president of the United States?
Well, it's quite right that the leader of the opposition, and indeed anybody else in a senior position in British politics, should support NATO and should talk about building up NATO. That is absolutely right. But if that is to be interpreted as a direct rebuke to Donald Trump after remarks that he made recently, then given that Keir Starmer could be our Prime Minister, it would not, and that Trump could be the American president, it would not be a particularly good thing for diplomatic relations between, two very important and senior members in NATO.
And just a couple of seconds to ask you about the comments of Illegal Migration Minister Michael Tomlinson, who said he can guarantee flights carrying asylum seekers to Rwanda will happen before the next election. It's a bold statement. If it does happen, what will be the political significance?
Well, bold is a very kind description. One might say rash would be a more appropriate description. I mean, if they do get Rwanda off the ground, and they get it off the ground in time for it to make a difference, that second one is actually often ignored. We talk as if getting a plane in the air is it, but it isn't. It's actually got to make the difference. If they do manage to do that before the next election, now it sounds as if that's definitely going to be in October because they're not going to do it before May. If they're going to do that before the next election, yeah, that would help them. But they're not. We all know they're not.
Anne Widdecombe, have a splendid week and we'll see you next Sunday. My thanks to former government minister and popular broadcaster Anne Widdecombe. Coming up, tomorrow's newspaper front pages with full pundit reaction. Don't go anywhere.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It is 10:30, so time for tomorrow's front pages. OK, thank you to Ben for bringing these in. The Independent, British Army hero, give my Afghan comrade a home. Veteran paratrooper demands Britain reverse his decision to deny sanctuary to the commando who fought with him against the Taliban and now faces death if he is sent back. Daily Mail, can our police sink any lower? An exclusive from the paper. Nottingham stabbing victims' families sickened to learn that officers shared graphic details of injuries on WhatsApp in a latest horrifying scandal. Also, just peachy, Emma is the belle of the BAFTA's Best Actress winner, Emma Stone, at the awards tonight. Also in the Mail, I've discovered the weight loss drug Ozempic has an incredible side effect. And that's from Dr. Max Pemberton. The Guardian, Putin accused of covering tracks over Navalny death. Surely not. Perish the thought, Neil Parish. Hey, listen, don't be too rude about Putin, you know.
He might look out for me.
He might visit your farm.
Exactly.
Fighting must now stop in Gaza, says Starmer. And ministers confirm phone ban for English schools. Ministers have confirmed plans to ban mobiles in English schools, releasing guidance which some unions said included practices that have already been widely adopted. BAFTA's 2024 Emma Stone wins for Poor Things, but it is Oppenheimer's night. Daily Telegraph, Badenoch accuses Post Office boss of lying in Horizon row. The business secretary, Kemi Badenoch, has accused the former chairman of the Post Office of lying in a row over the handling of the Horizon scandal. Head teachers told to search pupils for mobile phones. Victims of crime waiting 5 years for cases to go to court. And Russia jails Navalny protesters for laying flowers and candles. The newspaper, Jeremy Hunt, Chancellor, budget tax cuts possible without reducing public spending. Jeremy Hunt tries to allay fears that he'll cut public spending in next month's budget. Treasury sources tell the newspaper that cutting services to fund personal tax reductions will only be necessary if economic forecasts further limit the Chancellor's financial headroom. Daily Mirror, Post Office scandal, now make them pay. Sub-postmasters tonight urged voters to oust the Tories amid claims the government tried to delay compensation. Axed Post Office Chief Henry Staunton sparked fury today by alleging he was told to stall on payouts to victims on the Horizon scandal until after the next election. Metro, Putin planned murder down to the second. And Financial Times, Apple faces €500 million antitrust fine for blocking music streaming rivals. I've got an idea. Why don't Apple remove Apple Music from the EU? See how they get on without them. OK, let's get reaction to tomorrow's front pages. In the company of three good friends of mine, former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, farmer and ex-Tory MP, he saw the error of his ways, Neil Parish, and trade unionist and top political commentator Andy MacDonald. Lots of stories to get through. But let's start, if we can, with this story in the Daily Telegraph. Victims of crime, Andy MacDonald, waiting 5 years for cases to go to court. I mean, our criminal justice system is on its knees, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, this is I think comes under the remit of the Home Secretary's office. The Home Office, they deal with the police and, you know, the processes around it. You know, we've had, 5 Home Secretaries in 5 years? So this is clearly not an issue that the Conservative government are taking seriously. You know, the Home Office is distracted with migration, a fair distraction, but still, all these Home Secretaries, they can't just ignore the police force and the things that are happening at home. It's just a government that isn't taking it seriously.
Well, yes, and we saw, didn't we, Annunciata, during austerity cuts to the Justice Department of, I think, 40% when Ken Clarke was Justice Secretary. It seems like we're paying the price now.
I think the Justice Department has huge problems. That we've got the issue with overcrowded prisons, that, you know, in Scotland they're discussing letting people out early because there aren't enough places, but we're in a pretty similar situation here. The prison that came out last week with the most horrific cases of falling down and bad treatment, it was appalling. But that's not to say it should be cushy. But if justice is to exist and be respected, it has got to be swift. And keeping people in limbo for 5 years is not justice.
Is that the first time you've ever used the word cushy, by the way?
I doubt it.
Sounds very becoming from your rather illustrious tongue. What do you think about this story, Neil? Because you won't have safe streets if the courts are blocked.
I mean, right from sort of closing magistrates' court right the way through to the High Courts, you know, everything has been delayed. Getting rid of magistrate courts was a huge mistake. And also, of course, you know, after COVID and during COVID, lots of cases got delayed, and it's never been put right. It was bad before, but it's a damn sight worse now. And I think, you know, victims do expect justice. And I think, you know, we have got to review our prison system as well to make sure that actually we lock up the right people, but we're not actually locking up people that we don't need to lock up, because that's wrong too.
Most
definitely. So, I mean, the whole thing is broken, and somebody needs to get it by the scruff of the neck and make it work.
Well, Andy, could that be the Labour Party, who are likely to win the next election? Do you think they'll fix law and order in this country and the courts?
I think they've got a good chance. You know, in the Home Office, you've got Yvette Cooper, you know, a very experienced parliamentarian. I mean, she's been in the Commons since the Blair years. You know, at the helm, Keir Starmer, former Director of Public Prosecutions. You know, he knows the justice system like the back of his hand. Experienced barrister, experienced public servant. I think, yeah, they are the government to do it.
There you go. Can you argue with that, Neil?
I think that changes need to be made. It'll be interesting to see what Labour does do. But
Keir Starmer, law and order Prime Minister.
Yeah,
he knows the law inside out.
It'll be... it's quite a broken system now. I think, you know, also it will be putting the right funds in place to make it work as well. So, you know, I wish him well if he's able to succeed in doing it, because it's not going to be easy.
He's quite good at doing his own PR and remembering the cases that he investigated as chief prosecutor that went well, but not so much those that didn't work out. And you just have to look at the post offices. There are various other cases I don't even want to think about. But just taking credit doesn't mean you've got to the nitty-gritty. And in fact, this is a structural fault as much as it is a legal one.
Yes, of course. I mean, Keir Starmer, perhaps not directly responsible for the Post Office scandal, but on his watch, this miscarriage of justice occurred.
Indeed, and some of the prosecutions were done under his auspices.
Yeah, OK, that's... Labour, of course, have said he wasn't aware of that, but he was the boss at the time, and you can't argue with that. Annunciata, let me ask you about this story in both The Telegraph and also, just gathering my notes here, The Guardian as well. Ministers confirm phone ban for English schools. It's amazing to think that up till now children haven't been allowed a mobile phone in the classroom.
Well, you see, I don't agree that they have. And I know this from bitter personal experience, and my daughter will not forgive me for naming probably the only time she's been in trouble at school. She's pretty well behaved, a nice young girl. But just after she started her secondary school, her grammar school, she was caught with a phone trying to text me from the loos, because you're not allowed to have your phones at school.
I mean, I hate to intrude on private grief about what the text related to. Was it a complaint about the lunchbox or something?
It was to do with collection, that really exciting subject. And the school instantly got onto me and reminded me of the rules, which I didn't know, and reminded her how she could get a message to home if she needed to. That there are schools that already take this kind of thing very seriously, that they are, without doubt, a distraction in the classroom. Isadora knows children at other schools who are perfectly capable of texting without looking at their phone. They can type an entire message. They're on them all the time under their desks. And I think it's preventing pupils learning, it's preventing teachers teaching, and banning them in the classroom is a very good thing.
Most definitely. I mean, certainly my son's local state school, they're not allowed a phone in the building, on the premises, and they've had that policy for a couple of years.
I mean, absolutely right, because, I mean, I'm worried that as the generations go on, that they won't actually be able to be communicate verbally, you know, and I'm being serious now, because so much messaging, so much texting, so much done on the social media, and yet conversation is what we need, and interaction in social. So it's not only about the learning, it's also about making sure they're actually talking to each other and having, you know, what I call a proper schooling, where you've got the social side. I mean, I didn't enjoy school for the academic side of it, but I did enjoy it for seeing all my mates. And when I left school to go farming, I found it very lonely on the farm. Hence, I went into politics. Whether that was a good thing or not, I don't know in hindsight, but that's why I did it.
Well, indeed, Neil, you'll know the perils of looking at your mobile phone when you're concentrating.
I do indeed.
I couldn't resist.
There we go.
How could I not, Andy? I'm going to his farm.
I knew you were going to get me on that.
I'm going to the farm on Tuesday. Did you know that? Yeah. And there will be photos of my trip to Neil's farm. I can't wait.
Very good.
And he's promised me...
The cows are waiting.
Well, I'm going to have my hands on the udders first thing.
No, I'm going to persuade you the difference between a milking cow and a beef cow, all right?
To find out. I'm not sure the cow will like finding out. But, Andy, listen, let's get to a couple of other stories if we can. Listen to this story. Badenoch accuses post office boss of lying in Horizon row. And then another story in relation to the post office. Now make them pay. Sub-postmasters tonight urge voters to oust the Tories amid claims the government tried to delay compensation.
I mean, what a mess this entire thing is. And I really do feel sorry for these sub-postmasters, because they're just being used as a political football, you know, by the papers, by MPs, by political activists. I just feel dreadful for them.
Yeah.
You know, who knows what's happened here? You know, everyone's saying, oh, well, it was him, it was her, it was him, it was her. Everyone's like, it's just such a mess. There needs to be... I know there is an independent inquiry going on, but there needs to be another independent inquiry to this whole mess about the payments, whether it was tried to be used as a political action. I mean, what's gone off?
Yes, I mean, Annunziata, do you have any intel about whether the government did try to sort of delay these payments until after the election? Do we know whether such cloak and dagger activity goes on in government?
I think we can be pretty confident that it does under governments of every type. That we only have to look to the blood scandal and the delays on that, the delays on compensation for that, that governments fundamentally try to avoid admitting fault and handing out money, no matter how much it is owed to the people who have suffered. And I have absolutely no insight into this specific case, but we do need to understand, and we most importantly need to get decent compensation to people whose lives have been ruined and in some cases lost.
I just think that no political party comes out of this smelling of roses, and we have just got to get the compensation to those postmasters. I think it's appalling what they have been through. They have been persecuted, they've been ruined. Some of them actually committed suicide over it.
Yes.
I mean, I just think, for goodness sake, just pay out them and stop these cases. You see, the post office should never have been able to bring their own prosecutions, and that's the problem. And I think governments of all colours, you know, including the leader, you know, Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats when he was in coalition, they knew far too much what was going on, and they didn't do anything about it. And I don't think anybody... Let's sort of draw a line under it. I don't think we actually need another inquiry, because we've had too many blasted inquiries now. Just get on and actually pay them out, pay them compensation, and stop prosecuting them. Meaning, why is it that there was never any problem with postmasters, and then all of a sudden you get hundreds and hundreds of them that are on the fiddle? I mean, it was just crazy. It should never have been done. And for goodness sake, can we not draw a line on it and under it, and can we not actually stop prosecuting them, pay them out, and for goodness sake, give them a pardon, if you like, for all of those that have been so wrongly treated? Because I know if I was a postmaster and was honest and this had been done to me, I would just feel horrendous, and their families and everybody else are affected by it. So for goodness sake, government, you know, just do something about it, get it sorted.
The compensation will never undo the pain and hurt that's been caused.
Of course.
No.
But it will at least allow them to live.
And certainly, you know, acknowledge... I mean, who's acknowledged, really, that they were wrong? Nobody's really acknowledged that they were wrong. You know, I mean, if you make a mistake, that's one thing, you know, I did do for all my sins. You acknowledge you're wrong and apologise and get it sorted. But nobody's doing it, and they're just sort of covering everything up and pretending it never happened when these people's lives were destroyed.
Absolute scandal. I couldn't agree more. Well, lots more to come. My pundits will nominate their headline hero and back page zero of the day. Plus, more newspaper front pages. We've got The Times and The Sun, and a story from inside the papers why you're no longer allowed to call old people sweet or kind. Find out why next.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, folks, more front pages are in. Let's have a look. Where should we go first, Alistair? Let's have a look at the Times newspaper. And thousands of foreign care workers are breaking UK visa rules. Schools will get greater powers to ban mobile phones. And Google chief says AI fakes pose a serious threat to democracy. OK, next up, the Sun newspaper. Margot robbed of a BAFTA, but she gets Andy McDonald's vote. You'd like to give her a trophy, wouldn't you?
I would give her many BAFTAs.
OK, there you go. Exclusive. Aces shock. Drugs factory in Prem Star's house. A Premier League star was shocked to find out that one of his houses had been turned into a cannabis farm. Police acting on a tip-off raided the semi, part of the Aces buy-to-let empire, and found hundreds of drug plants. Probably all the tenants were dribbling after that, I would have thought. OK, look, folks, that is a cracking set of stories. Let's catch up on the emails before we get to your headline heroes and back page zeros. First of all, we were discussing Prince Harry earlier in the company of Angela Levin. Should the Prince of Wales, Prince William, forgive his brother and bring him back into the royal fold? Margaret says, Mark, are you mad? No one wants Harry back. He cannot be trusted, not more to sell more info about his family, and only wants to come back temporarily to get more fodder for his next broadcast, etc. Thank you, Margaret. Jax says, Mark, thank goodness Prince William doesn't fall for Harry's rubbish. We don't need Harry and don't want him back under any circumstances. Please can't he become an American citizen and stop annoying us? Pat says, Mark, no, William should not ever forgive Harry. Remember the book Spare. Meanwhile, John Lewis have got themselves in hot water. It was the topic of my take at 10. And essentially, they've released a publication. They didn't pay for it themselves, but it was carried by them. They platformed a magazine which recommended breast binders to their 70,000 staff. A big reaction on email. This from another Margaret, who's Margaret Lee Phillips, who says, Mark, this is the end of John Lewis. Once again, Stonewall and mermaids are bringing down another once-loved British institution. Any others on John Lewis? Let's finally get to illegal immigration and legal immigration. Is immigration good for the country? We debated that with Professor Matthew Goodwin. And Val says, Mark, nobody can dispute that we need immigrant workers, but we don't need to give permanent leave to stay to anyone. Work visas should have to be renewed every year or so, according to the job. Look, so many great emails tonight. I want to say that it's been a really busy show and I've not had time for as much of your feedback as I would like, and we'll put that right next weekend. OK, more reaction to the day's big stories. Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Neil Parish and Andy McDonald. A quick word, if we can, on this story in The Telegraph. Calling older people sweet or kind is a damaging stereotype, say campaigners. Andy, would you agree?
Well, I've met some very nasty old people, in fairness, you know. So I think, God, it must be a slow news day, honestly, if this is the stories that are filling up the papers, you know, this drug factory premiership, this kind and old story, the school phone ban. I mean...
Well, Neil, you're sweet and kind, but you're not old.
Exactly. I'm getting old, though, aren't I?
Yeah,
so I shall hope that somebody will call me sweet and kind.
I think you're very well preserved. I think that West Country air is very kind on your complexion.
Do you? I've got my mother's skin, I think, which I'm fortunate for. But seriously, I think, you know, I mean, if somebody's nice and sweet, can't we call them that? If they're horrible, we probably call them horrible too, can't we? So, you know, I mean, you know, I think it's just the whole world has gone crazy when we can't call them nice.
Can we stop policing the language?
Oh, please, please, can we stop policing the language? I am so fed up with this. Call a spade a spade. If she's nice and sweet, call her nice and sweet, whether she's 9 or 90.
Yes. There you go. Well, Joe Biden's quite sweet and cuddly, isn't he? Well, let's
shall we debate that? Shall we?
We might have to debate it. OK, headline heroes and back page zeros. Who is your headline hero, Annunciata?
So mine is full-fat dairy.
Yes.
I am aware it is not a person, but it is fantastic, and it turns out finally being recognised for its health benefits. They've been known about for years, but the government, the NHS and mainly the food industry wouldn't like us to know too much about it, keep discouraging people, and of all places, TikTok has discovered that full-fat dairy is much better for you, better outcomes for cardiovascular, for heart disease, for preventing strokes. Go full-fat dairy.
Well, indeed, when we went to a sort of low-fat eating protocol, which started in the 70s and 80s and 90s, what happened? We became obese.
We became fatter and less healthy. And, in fact, going back to natural products is incredibly good for you, and bring back the gold top every time.
Always, all day long. Neil, briefly, if you can, your headline hero.
Previous dairy farmer, I agree entirely with Annunciata.
Right. I'll be drinking your unfiltered milk on Tuesday.
Right, OK.
By the way, that could be misconstrued.
Right, OK.
Family show. We've all had a drink.
It was tractors.
Be quiet, please. To be serious for one moment, this is very serious. My hero is Alexei Navalny, who, you know, he faced up to Putin. He campaigned against him. After being poisoned by him, he then goes back into Russia. He's then imprisoned, basically tortured, and then murdered. And I'll be blunt about it. And as for you know, Putin visiting me on the farm, I mean, he's already banned me from going to Russia when I was still in Parliament.
You're on that list?
Yeah, I'm on that list. And so, therefore, you know, I hope he doesn't turn up at the farm, but we might have to deal with him if he did, Putin, because, you know, he needs to be sorted, this man. He's a murderer. I'm sorry, and you told me to be careful, but I'm not going to be. And I think, you know, it's time the West... I mean, and also, you know, David Cameron talks about sanctions, and so does Biden. Let's actually do it.
Neil,
Let's not
keep that
talk about
shotgun by your bed. Briefly, just a couple of
I think.
seconds, Andy, your headline hero.
I got two. Damien Egan and Jen Kitchen, the winners of the by-elections in Kingswood and Wellingborough. Show great performance by both of them in difficult by-elections. What a win.
Name only the briefest back page zero, if you can.
Arthur F. Engoron, the judge who's just fined Trump politically motivated, counterproductive, rallying Trump's support.
Name only.
And mine, of course, is Putin.
Putin,
who,
we know why.
Such
And
a
Andy?
nasty man.
Richard Holden lost the by-elections. What a loser.
Go blimey. Well, look, thank you to my brilliant team, Greg, Lottie at home and Ben. I'll see you Friday at 8. Headliners is next.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Marco Patagna. Here's your latest weather update from the Met Office. We'll hold on to rather mixed conditions weather-wise across the UK during the week ahead, all of us seeing some rain at times and turning colder from the north later on. We've got a small ridge of high pressure moving in from the west tonight, quietening the weather down, but notice weather fronts gathering out towards the northwest and they'll bring further unsettled weather during the next few days. So as we go into the evening and during the overnight period, much of the UK is set fine. We'll see some clear spells, allowing a few mist and fog patches to form, particularly across Wales and the south-west of England. But outbreaks of rain work their way in from the north-west across Scotland and Northern Ireland, reaching Wales, the north of England by the morning, with blustery showers towards the north-west later. A mild night, so no frost problems tonight. And as we go into Monday, that band of rain continues its journey southeastwards, becoming light and patchy as it reaches the southeast during the course of the morning, and then fizzling out to give much brighter weather across the UK heading into the afternoon. Some showers, though, towards the northwest, quite blustery here, with further rain moving in across the west of Scotland later in the day. It's a pretty mild day once again, temperatures generally in double figures, peaking at 10 in the north and near 13 or 14 degrees down towards the southeast. As for Tuesday, well, a band of wet and windy weather will move its way southeastwards across many northern parts of the UK. Towards the south and east, it stays mostly fine with a few bright spells at times and staying quite mild once again for the time of year, with temperatures into the low teens Celsius in a few spots. But it stays pretty unsettled as we go into Wednesday and Thursday, further wet weather around and turning colder from the north later on too.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Look, you're a respected royal biographer, and there are so many people who are on the sort of royal gravy train, if you will, people who are making a career out of gossip and speculation. But yours very much built on confidence and sources and facts. And you don't offer an opinion that often inside your book. But when you do, I suppose, therefore, it carries a bit more weight. So when you say that the Sussexes are easily offended and, you know, effectively pretty prickly, what do you mean and what have you based that on?
Well, on numerous... Their riposte to any given situation in their books, in their TV interviews. And let's not forget, in a lot of TV interviews, 6-part Netflix drama, Spare, you see time and again that they feel that they feel resentful. They feel that, you know, something hasn't gone their way and that this is part of some sort of calculated campaign against them. And actually, I mean, when you've got a fast-moving story, I mean, for example, in my book, I go into those frantic hours after the death of the Queen, and everybody's trying to sort themselves out. And Harry writes in his book Spare how you know, no one will return his calls and he can't get through to anyone, and it's sort of it's just all a bit me. And actually, the whole kind of royal machine, if you like, is a team effort. And I just think it's very sad because, you know, Harry and Meghan, they had such potential. And now when we do tend to hear from them, on a royal matter, it's just to say how miserable they were being royal. And that was, you know, they were royal for whatever it was, 600-700 days. They're post-royal now for over twice that time.
Can you envisage a scenario where they're back in England and they're back in royal life?
I can't envisage a situation where they're back, as it were, as part of the sort of royal working unit, but I could certainly see it becoming a kind of normal thing for them to keep.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Headliners is up next.